Okay, so when you're finding the slope and you're given 2 points, the 2 points that you're given are your x1, y1, and then your x2, y2. Does that ring a bell for your formula? What goes on the top, your x's or your y's? Y, yeah? Okay, so y2 minus y1 on the top, and x2 minus x1 on the bottom. Okay? So, today, we're going to do something a little bit different because yesterday we were writing equations of lines. Okay, but let's look at example 3. It says our lines 1 and 2, which they call L1 and L2, passing through the given points, parallel, perpendicular, or neither. Okay, so we have to figure out if these lines, our lines 1 and 2, are they parallel? So remember our sign for parallel? They're like two slanted lines next to each other. Are they perpendicular or are they neither? Okay, so if they're parallel, who can tell me what their slopes are? The same, yeah? Good, okay, so you have the same slope. Okay, if they're perpendicular, then this is one where when you have the 2 slopes, you're going to find the product. So slopes multiply to -1. Their product is -1. And neither means this doesn't happen and this doesn't happen. So they're not the same, and when you multiply, they do not equal -1. Okay, so we're just going to do this process twice. We're going to have to find the slope for L1 and we're going to have to find the slope for L2. So here's your x1, y1, your x2, y2. And I just like to label, so here's my line 1. Okay, and then I want you to plug those in. And then when you're ready, we'll do the same thing with line 2. Oops. Okay, and then Avery, can you tell me what you wrote on the top here? Good. Okay, so the y2 minus y1 is 2 minus 0. Okay, and then Cece, can you tell me what you put on the bottom? Good. And then 2 minus 1. Okay, so Gabe, what's 2 minus 0? Yeah, so if you have 2 and you take away nothing, what do you have? No? So if you have 2, but you don't take anything away, you still have how many? No. Yeah, you have 2. Okay? Alright, and then what's 2 minus 1? 1. Okay, and then do you guys know what 2 divided by 1 is? 2. Okay, great. Now we're going to do the same thing for L2. So for the second line, again, this is your x1, y1. So whatever your first point is going to be the first x and the first y. Okay, now we have to be careful with this one because there are negatives. So this is going to be -35. You always put a minus in between. So if it's minus a negative, that's when you're going to change it to plus. And then for the bottom, you have -10 minus, and this is a +5. Now, if you're ever unsure about whether the negative turns into a plus, you can always do 35 minus negative 5, and it's going to give you the same value if you do this. Okay, so we have negative 30. Okay, and then we can do negative 10 minus 5, negative 15. We always want to divide to see if that reduces. When the number is bigger on top, you're definitely going to want to divide this and not use the ABC button. Okay, and then if you get a whole number, that's going to be your slope. Okay, so obviously for both of them we got 2, so that means you have the same slope. So if it's the same, okay, then we say the lines are perpendicular. Oh yes, sorry, the lines are parallel. Thank you. Yep, the lines are parallel. Thanks for being awake with me today. Yep, the lines are parallel. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing for B. Again, these are 2 different lines. So you're going to find the slope for line 1, and then you're going to find the slope for line 2. Okay, and I'm going to give you a moment to do that. You guys are doing a really nice job on the setup, and a really nice job just taking care of those negatives. Okay, so it's 7 minus 5 on the top, and then on the bottom you have negative 6 minus negative 2, so that has to turn to a plus. Okay, so you should end up with 2 on the top. What's, Gabe, did you calculate that? What's negative 6 plus 2 going to be? What'd you get? Negative 4. Good. Okay. Now, do you see how the number on top is smaller than the one on the bottom? Because that's smaller, you could use your ABC button to reduce, or when I was walking around, I saw Stacy did a nice job of dividing each one by what they had in common, right? Because what do 2 and 4 have in common? Yeah, 2. So you can divide both by 2. So you would get 1 over, and then make sure you keep the negative with this. So your slope is negative 1/2. This is your slope. Or your M. Should have put M equals. Okay, now for line 2, we're going to do 13 minus 1. Okay, and then negative 1 minus 5. So you get 12 on the top. What's negative 1 minus 5? Negative 6. Great. Now, do you see how the number on top is bigger? So if the number on top is bigger, let's divide. Does 6 go into 12 evenly? Yeah. So it goes in there twice, so this will be negative 2 because you have a negative on the bottom. Okay, so this is our slope for L2, this is our slope for L1. So obviously they're not the same, right? We can see that right away. So they're not the same, so then you have to multiply. So if they're not the same, we know that they're not parallel. So this is always the first thing. See if they're the same. Okay, the second thing you do is multiply them together. So anytime you have a fraction, we're putting that in our calculator with parentheses, okay, times negative 2. And again, I recommend the parentheses because that's going to work every single time. No matter what calculator you have, you can use, oops, not divided by. Delete that, okay, and then times negative 2. Okay, so we got 1. This is really close to what we want, but you have to see if it's -1. So if they're not the same, and the product does not equal -1, what's your final answer? Neither. Okay, so for this, it says, is it possible for 2 lines with negative slopes to be perpendicular? Is it possible for 2 lines with negative slopes to be perpendicular? Okay, so remember that in order to be perpendicular, there are 2 things, right? The product has to be -1, and they have to be opposite reciprocals. So this question is asking you, is it possible for 2 lines that both have a negative slope to be perpendicular? Okay, so I'm going to have you talk to somebody next to you, and I want you guys to decide if it's possible and then come up with a reason why or why not. Okay, so Erica's response was, no, it's not going to be possible because we know that it has to multiply to a negative, and she said the only way to multiply to a negative is if you have a positive and a negative. If you have 2 negatives, it's always going to multiply to be a positive. I love that answer. Okay, what other reasons did you guys come up with? But did you word it a little different? So Erica was saying because the product is equal to a negative, it's not possible because a negative times a negative is always going to be equal to a positive. But Joey and Gabe, you guys talked about the product? You did? Okay. Oh, yeah. That's awesome. Good. That's a really nice explanation, guys. So, I thought maybe the other thing you might say is because if they're opposite, what does opposite mean? Yeah, negative and? Yep, that's the reciprocal part. And the opposite part is what? Yeah, so the slopes have to be opposites in order to be perpendicular, right? So if the slopes have to be opposites, one has to be positive and the other negative. And you don't have to have both explanations down. These were just the 2 possible ones I thought you would come up with. But I really like that you guys thought about how 2 negatives multiply to a positive. And if we're going to multiply to a negative, we better have 1 positive and 1 negative. Okay, that's excellent.